I'm a social scientist, and my research looks at the interaction between environmental issues, agricultural issues, and political and social systems. So one example of something that I'm working on right now is a project with Drew Margolin and Shorna Allred and our graduate student Jennifer Fownes. And we're looking at how US politicians and politicians in New York State communicate about climate change over social media. And another project that we're working on here at the Institute for Climate Smart Solutions is looking at how farmers view climate change and extreme weather, what actions they're taking, and what resources and information they need to best be able to respond.
Under the current scenarios of global climate change, atmospheric carbon dioxide has been increasing. My research, along the help with my team members, we look at the effect of atmospheric carbon dioxide on the plants, especially the ecophysiology of the plants, and how we can apply the results of that research to management questions. I investigate forest ecosystems in the current scale within the past 100-150 years using two proxies. One of them is tree ring analysis and the other one is pollen analysis.
My main climate research area is really two-pronged. It researches planning and design strategies for comprehensively addressing multiple impacts of climate change at once, rather than as single insulated issues. And this is done really by supporting urban water systems, urban ecosystems, and built environments through an integrated climate-adapted design approach. It also looks at engagement strategies for inspiring communities to take action on climate change through a forward-thinking studio design process.
I'm a soil scientist, and I study how soils hold on to carbon, how they lose carbon, and I'm particularly interested to use soil carbon stocks and the sequestration of soil carbon as a way to withdraw carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
I work on the slightly thorny subject of climate engineering or solar geoengineering. This is ideas like putting aerosols up into the stratosphere, which would cool the planet. This would be a terrible idea if we were to do that instead of cutting emissions. But the reality is that right now we're not on a trajectory to hit 1.5 degrees or even 2 degrees. And if you wind up in a world closer to 3 degrees, it's plausible that some amount of geoengineering would help reduce risks. So my personal view, which not everyone shares, is that we actually need to make sure we're informed about this technology.
Currently we're using land-based food security interventions which are going on in Africa and investigate the climate change mitigation and adaptation potentials of this thing in sub-Saharan African environment. The primary purpose of this thing is like countries such as Ethiopia, where climate is posing significant hazard to food security and the well-being of the society. We wanted to see how different land-based management interventions can help climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts of the country.
There are two things that I'm working on or have worked on that are specifically climate change related. Then there's things that are peripherally related but grow out of the climate crisis. So the first two things that I've done are the relationship of climate change to the issues of indigenous people. I've specifically looked at Pacific Basin indigenous people. I've looked at the impact on Native Americans as well, and I've done some research in that area and I've written a couple of things. The other thing I've focused on is the public trust. And I've been involved with expanding, writing, and working on the public trust duty as being implicated by the failure of the government, both state and federal, and probably internationally, but certainly state and federal, to act to control climate change, or to not control climate change, but to do something, right? The stalemate is, I think, frustrating, and one of the things I've written about is the underlying obligation of the government, as a function of its legitimacy, really, to act in defense of the people. And climate change is actually, addressing climate change is actually working in defense of the people, in my view. The other thing I've worked on are water issues and water-related issues. People take water for granted. We all take water for granted. Coming as I did before I came to Cornell from a rather dry part of the country, it was just startling to me that people weren't concerned about the way climate change had affected rain patterns and thus affected water rights and allocation decisions and things like that. So both California and Texas, where I've done water work, have been implicated by climate change, and I've written about that. The last thing is I've worked with, I just wrote a small piece about California's greenhouse gas trading scheme. California has been, I guess, the most aggressive state to address climate change and the precursor elements of climate change. And so it's gotten some, I think, resistance in some communities. And what I just wrote about was why I think that resistance is misplaced, and reanalyzed the way in which the trading scheme works.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.